Well, Shari, thank you for being here today for this little talk.
Yeah.
I hope it's going to be I know it's going to be informative. Shari Keitzenauer. You tell people when they are finding out about what you do that you're a healer, right?
Yeah.
Could you tell us about that
Yeah.
healing, being a healer, and this journey of healing?
Yeah. Well, this always brings up and it always makes me awkward because it's like, you're a healer. Is it like Reiki? And I'm always like, well, not exactly. Well, how can I put this without sounding arrogant? But there is no other way to say, but I do the heavy lifting, basically. I do remove a lot of the energy that gets stuck in the body and the spirit and the mind, and that doesn't let the flow move and travel in the natural balanced flow that it's meant to flow.
And I've seen you do this work, so I know when you sum it up and say you're doing the heavy lifting,
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about, and I know that it's for real. Maybe to help people understand how you've become a heavy lifter, you could talk a little bit about how you learned
That do
your
heavy
healing
lifting.
your healing practice.
Well, I'll be honest. When I met my teacher, he already identified me as someone that was doing that work, and I didn't know. All I knew is that I felt oppressed all the time, or I felt sick a lot of the time, or I felt, because I was already picking up on the energy, and how did I come into heavy lifting? The heavy lifting started with, as soon as I got with my teacher, I immediately started to be tested. And when I mean tested, where I would walk into a room and feel immediately sick and not know what was happening, or felt like I couldn't gain consciousness I couldn't get back in my body, or I felt ungrounded, or I felt whacked out. And I started to get these occurrences again and again. And later on I was told that I was being tested, and I was clearing energy. I was clearing energy whether I was walking into a room or with a person. It didn't matter. It was just how my training came from life. And my teacher was there to just tell me, act as a, what do you call it, a guide, a teacher.
Mm-hmm. When you say energy, and you say you can feel it and that you can sense it, I think we all have an idea of that feeling and that sensation. And I think a lot of people would maybe chalk it up to intuition, because there's not a lot of other things they could chalk it up to. But I think you have a different relationship with understanding energy and a different way of working with energy. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your understanding of energy, how we could better understand the energies around us, and some of the ways that you work with energy that's intuitive, and then maybe that's beyond intuitive.
Well, there's this reality, and then there's other realities, but the energy world is very real. And what I would love to start to talk about is, it's in some ways more real than this reality. And it was brought to my attention when I was young already, the other worlds. And the thing was, it was always quite natural for me, because I feel like maybe I had been doing it for many eons. And but my relationship to it was I think I was uber sensitive. And I was always told that, oh, you're very sensitive, you're so sensitive. And I always was very ashamed about it. It was just something that I was, So I could hear a pin drop on the other side of the world, that kind of sensitivity. And I had the ability to witness or to hear these other energy forms. I mean, I'll stop there because it's just so dense.
Okay.
You know? Yeah.
So you have this connection, you have this ability to perceive energies in different ways, and it gets translated in your life as being sensitive and other things.
Yeah.
Eventually you meet up with a healing practice and a teacher, and you learn to work with all of this.
Yeah, I learned that what I'm experiencing, I'm not imagining things. A lot of what, from the very early days of working with my teacher, it was like, you're not crazy. This is happening. And I'm like, wow. And it was like, it was very fun. It was very invigorating to find like something that was not gaslighting me, if you like, because a lot of people I worked with was like, oh, you know, everything is love, and you know, you're not hearing any of this, or you're not experiencing any of these negative energies, which I was, and I didn't want to, but the reality is that they are very real, you know.
It must have been a relief to
It was a huge relief. Yeah, it was like, oh, thank God, you know. So yeah.
So this subject of energy is so interesting, and I think it's so important because it's probably one of the first things you are looking for when you're working with somebody. Can you talk about what are the important things that you want to do or want to establish or want to look for when you're trying to tap into somebody's energy?
Yeah. So usually this is how it works with me, is that already during my sleep. So when I meet the person, I'm literally looking at the blueprint already. And it's almost, I always say this, above me, above my normal everyday thinking, but somehow I understand it to be the way it works. I trust it. And that I'm just following already the blueprint that was downloaded the night before. And how do I know that? It's just what I experience over time, you know. So it's...
Well, you've done this for years, over and over again.
Over and over again. So I pretty much, I don't want to say always, but I pretty much trust the process, you know. By the time they get there, I'm being informed in my sleep. And I want to let people know, without spooking them, that I don't work alone. You know, I work with many, many guides that are pretty advanced. And by the time they inform me of everything, then I'm already like, I'm working with a higher directory. It's the only way.
We're talking about spirit energy. You're not talking about you can go to your phone and text somebody and say, hey, help me out here.
Yeah.
It's not like
it's
that.
Becoming faster and faster, where it's just, I trust it. But, you know, and I like to say to people, you know, somebody will ask me a question, like one of my students I'm working with, and they'll ask me something, and I'll say, I don't know, let me tune in, you know, because there's my opinion, and, you know, even my, you know, and then there's my, what I'm being shown, you know, and I don't always trust my opinion. I trust what I'm being shown. That feels much higher. Because I'm also human, and I'm also reading things from my own projected, you know, personality stuff. But sometimes when I'm working, when I go into a higher place within myself, I can see the soul, and I can see the truth, and I go past the personality everyday, you know, story.
What I think is so interesting about what you're talking about is that your healing practice is partly connected to the universal and partly connected to the personal, and it's not like you went to a 14-week course on something and now you have a certificate and whatever, and you can follow certain protocol. It's so people cannot understand what you do if they're looking for the certificate or the program or that
coming
tradition.
from the mental, there's no way to describe this. It's no way to describe. And people also ask, do you teach this? I'm like, how the hell am I going to teach this? There is no way. Even my teacher never taught me, He's like, you already know this. And he would say it. Like he would, someone would come for a session and he would give me the hardest one. And then he'd question me, and what do you think about it? And I'd be like, well, I don't know. And he put me in a place of, you do know, and then I would shift and I would say, this and this I experienced. And he's like, great. And he'd walk away. He wouldn't let me think. The moment you start like thinking or analyzing it, it's way above my everyday head. And I think that's why I can do this work, because the fact that I was a little bit, I don't want to say stupid, it's not stupid, but I was more, I don't even know the word, more...
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Like one thing that I think when I think about how you do things is that you have a very profound level of trust. You work with this idea of trust in these things that it wouldn't be possible to intellectualize.
No.
You wouldn't be able to like think your way into a place of feeling comfortable or safe with an idea.
Yeah.
It's something I know about you, and I think maybe that's something you have to share with other people, is what does it mean to trust, to know yourself and trust yourself and the things around you beyond being able to think about it.
Well, I do know that the guidance and my strong connection to the infinite God, the strong connection to all that is good. And my intention with the sessions is always like, how do I get this person out of the darkness into the light, so to speak, out of fear and into their power? How do I get them from being heavy and congested and into their balance or flow? And I trust, and I know from working with my own, it's the intention is bringing the person into goodness, into God, into, and that's how I go from there, and that's my aim. And I do trust that. It's a faith in God, really. It's a faith in a higher power. It's a faith in the most beautiful truth there is. I mean, and I don't know how to put it any further than that, like I just follow that. I just know to follow that. And I trust that there are really beautiful beings that help us. There's angelic beings, there's, I like to call them the divine ones, but I don't like to go too much into that because people are like, oh, I talk to Archangel Michael, and I keep it very simple, But now that we're here, it's like I know they're there, and I know they work with me because I'm committed to helping that individual. I know they're going to show up, and I know that person's ancestry will show up. So their moms, their sisters, their cousins, there's uncles, their dads. Their ancestry is all around them. And
you can sense that? You can read that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's 9 times out of 10 I'm working with someone, oh, who's that? Like, oh, who's that? And it just is. It just is. And I follow the orders. That was the main work that my teacher did with me, is getting me out of my fear and getting me humble and getting me like knowing who's who in the energy world. Those that are here to help and those that are here to infiltrate and, take over and possess or whatever word you want to use for that.
It's got to be hard to tell which
And
side of the fence
well, that's where a good healer, if I do say, is to, and knock on wood, is to learn how to stay neutral while working and while opening up these energy planes to allow for that which is here to help. And they're here to help. And that's, you have that, if you're aligned to that, not power, not like I'm great, but just aligned to helping that individual receive what they came there for. Because, why they came sometimes doesn't match what their personality is saying. Oh, my boyfriend left me, and maybe they're finally ready to achieve, moving forward in their life because, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow. Can you talk about, you mentioned the session, which is when somebody is going to spend a deliberate, intentional amount of time with you. I know you will do a session in person. I know you will do a session remotely. You have a lot of different formats. Could you talk a little bit about what happens in a session? You did mention that, you want to align with that person and bring the help that their various levels are ready for. But can you just talk about what happens in the beginning of a session, what gets you into it, what tells you that you're done with the session?
Okay, so people come, and I'm generally, one of my strongest gifts is to match their energy. Okay, I'm matching their energy. I'm just getting, their personality, right? That's first thing. Then getting them comfortable, getting them to the place where they feel safe, getting them to the place where they feel like, and it's safe now to shift from my personality and all its defenses and all its belief systems and all its no's and go into another place. And that is where it's more like a deeper soul spirit, where they can begin to like safely go from the personality all in control and then go into that soul place or spirit or, and they can then really listen and really shift into that place of receiving the healing. The healing is quick a lot of the time, but it's getting the person out of the way to receive the help or the guidance or that place of feeling like, oh yeah, like that place of, I remember this, everything is okay, and I am safe to let go now. And then that's where the magic happens. And it's a small place, and then they go in there, and I hold space like Mama Bear, and make sure nothing interferes. And then they have their experience there, and they talk with whomever, and they talk to their knowing, and they talk to their ancestors, and they talk to God, and they talk to, they have that real intimate connection to spirit. And then either there I will take out what doesn't belong there, take out that thing. When I say that thing, that attachment that's creating havoc, or help them to release some emotional stuff there. They feel safe enough to, and they cry, or you know what I mean. It depends, is this how they process, and then they go into a deep place of absorbing the new energy or frequency, which replaces the old place, and then they come back and then have a little chit chat with them. And this is also where my place of where I am good at is helping that person to have a connection to why this happened, why they brought it in the first place, how they align with it. It's not just random, like they walked down the street and negative energy jumped on them. No, like how they let it in. It's important, and to learn, and then to go back into their life with, a little bit more of a starter package, starter kit, or like, a little toolbox, and then, yeah.
I mean, it sounds like magic. It sounds like gold, what you're talking about in the session.
Thank you.
One thing I want to make sure is clear that a lot of this that you've described, it's not like therapy where you're sitting there. It's not like we're sitting here talking to each other, doing a little back and forth, but it's not like you're talking to them and they're talking back to you, and through some process of cognition and words that these things are happening.
Well, sometimes I'll use therapy type way to, begin the trust. That's how that person feels safe, to blah, 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 my mom did this and this and that. Like they feel like, because usually there are people that have had therapy and they feel like they need to describe, talk. Mm-hmm. It's like, yes, 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 yes. And I, and I receive you and I hear you're scared, or, this happened. And then get them to a place where they're finally like, they're letting go of this story. They're letting go of the story. And that's the healing. That's
huge. So what happens once they let go?
They release that energy that was holding them like in a gridlock. They release that emotion that was holding them in that gridlock. It's all to get them to free up themselves again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Free up themselves.
Yeah.
They get them to that place where they're very like, oh yes, yeah, this is my truth of who I am, and yeah.
Well, there's something powerful about story in general, but if you get empowered by the wrong story, then it's going to be hard to take that apart.
Yeah, getting people out of, and I've been talking about this a lot, like out of the false beliefs and out of their false stories of like, of how they identify, themselves to be. And then it can be it's a beautiful moment where they go, oh, I'm not this, or this is not truly who I am. And and they can shift their life. They can shift their identification with being sick, their identification with being like a victim, and how they perceive the world.
And again, a lot of what we just talked about, you describing this arc that happens in a session, it's not all through talking. There's other things that you are doing as part of your practice to access the energy and to activate the healing.
It's all about connecting the person, the individual, back to their soul. Back to their true self, back to that place where they aren't, the personality, where, we're coming from up here. A lot of my work is about coming from the soul and coming from not the personality. The personality is, then that's a therapy session, it's like, my mom did this to me, or this is much bigger. And it's like, and it's helping, hopefully, the person's ready or identify back to their God self, their soul, their pure, true self.
When you're talking to somebody and you're explaining this to them, how do you help them understand this idea of soul? What do you tell them?
It's a familiar knowing, and it's nothing I can really, it's this, and this. It's like, this is what I actually live for. This is my purpose, if you like, is helping people like remember. It's more like they get it through a feeling through their body. There's knowing, this real primal place. And hopefully I'm successful with just whatever means of method to get there, is to help the person remember, oh, this is who I am. And how I get them there is hopefully just holding that energy where it's a frequency where they just go, it's a frequency that makes them, it's like a light bulb going off.
I'm imagining somebody in a session with you and making these connections. You mentioned who shows up. Mothers, their mothers, guides. This whole, yes, it's just like this whole ancestral party.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, the role of the individual within this framework of a universal ancestry? What is the difference between a guide and an ancestor? Maybe sometimes they're the same, maybe they're sometimes different.
Well, I mean, it depends what they're there to work on, you know. I find like they're there to ask a question, and a real question, you know, a real life transformational question, you know. Do I go this way? Do I go that way? Like one of those questions that you really need to really be sincere, and it depends on the person and how open they are, because a lot of times when they're feeling it, they're like, oh my God, you know, like this is real, like I didn't like, you know, they're experiencing it. And then sometimes people don't have that kind of like they connect differently, like they sense something they don't know. But you know what's interesting, that most of the time people can feel when an ancestor comes in the room. Guides sometimes not, but ancestor yes, because there's something very familiar, you know. And that's also my next thing I want to say is, people always ask me, how do I connect with my guides? And that is up to, sometimes the guides don't want to connect with the individual because they're not ready. Sometimes.
Who, the individual or the guide?
The individual. Yeah, like they're not ready. And they just want to play with energy. They just want to show off. They just want to, you know, my guide says this, you know, and it's a very, they're not there to interrupt. They're there to, you know, get the individual to do what they're meant to do, you know, and stay on the right path.
Are you talking about a soul purpose?
Yeah, a soul purpose, keep them out of trouble, you know.
So it's not like individual ambition is...
Generally not.
Guides don't care about that.
No. They don't. You know, people are like, well, my soul purpose is to write a book. Maybe, you know, like, but generally not. You know, it's maybe. It's more to do with, it doesn't matter what the person's physically doing. It does not matter. It's getting on the track of allowing the ego to take backseat and doing and being who they're meant to be in the world. And a lot of times people get caught up in a thing or a, you know, a very, what word would I use? A very, and it's not about a thing. It's about a frequency. It's about, when a lot of times when talking about the soul, it's getting the person in, letting go of their shortcomings and going higher in consciousness.
Why is it that the ego seems to be so frequently disconnected with the soul? If I could just put it bluntly.
Yeah. Why? That's a very good question, because I feel that it's the ego had, for me, I find that the ego is connected a lot with the inner child and the wounded inner child, and all the programming, all their programming of operating in the world, through school and church and blah, blah, blah. And it's a survival mechanism, and it's vast. There's a lot to be said here, but I find with my work, the ego's very identified with the little child, the 3-year-old, the wounded little child, and the teenager, the 12, 13-year-old. Seems to be where the ego is.
It must be really valuable for you, actually, to understand the person's ego as far as the blueprint's concerned, and then what you're going to do in a session.
Sure. It's just getting that person to get on board with, if you go down this road and let go of this, I promise you'll be much happier. But that thing is like, I know you're right, but,
Yeah.
But they did this to me, still like feeling like they want to fight, or still feeling like they need to protect, or still feeling like they need to, along those lines.
It makes a lot of sense, right? It's connected with the inner child. That's about protection and feeling safe. And what you want to do when you're working with somebody is make them feel safe. So give them an alternative to just the ego as being the protector.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What's the weirdest thing that has ever come up in a session?
Ooh. I've seen some weird things.
I bet you have.
People speaking in tongues. People like, swearing. People, I've seen some weird things. I almost don't want to scare people with, some of the things I saw. But a lot of it is on the energy plane, and, it's a... But let's just say this. It's a good thing that people don't see sometimes, because it would freak them out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing that they can perhaps have access to something like a session where it could come out, and then it could get... I mean, in some ways, you're a healer, but also some of the things you do is about taking out the trash,
Taking out the trash is a perfect way to put it.
And so there's a lot of hats that you will end up wearing with the practice, the healing practice that you have.
Yeah.
What do you do with the trash? Where does it go?
Okay, that's a brilliant question, because a lot of what happens with that trash is it goes back to, if the guidance that I'm working with takes it to its appropriate place. Sometimes they're bringing it back to that dimension that it belongs in. It's meant to go transition to that place, or it's time for it to move to its next evolution. And I dispense it in the ground. I dispense it in the heavens. I dispense it through, and also as it travels through me, it gets kind of broken up into nothing. Like I almost filter it.
Yeah.
So there's many different ways, but a lot of it just gets filtered through me and comes out the other side, almost like.
As a person who has this practice and is connected to lots of different energies and is able to perceive and work with a lot of energies which are not your own, and you're filtering things and you're taking out trash, how do you take care of yourself? How do you...
Lord have mercy. I can only tell you, it's I just find my way, and from the very beginning, my teacher, that was part of his whole thing with me, was to allow for me to see how I would process it out, and he would be there to say, something's like not leaving, or, but the number one thing that I would say is having my quiet time in the morning, and listening, having that ability to have those moments of, meditation or quiet time where I can go, wait a minute, what's that? There's something still traveling with me, and I need to do. I need to do a lot of work with continuing to not, or I get a little nudge on my shoulder from my little superior saying, you're still have the energy with you, and I'm like, oh, okay. So, kind of all of the above. But you kind of find your way. And my thing is that I have zero tolerance for feeling anything but my best self. So I don't want to go out half-cocked after a session. I want it to be gone. I want to feel clear. I do a lot of prayer work. And I can't stress enough how important prayer work is.
When you talk about prayer, what are you talking about?
You're saying, you're asking, you're saying, you're affirming exactly what you want. And I would say something like, please allow for this energy to clear from me completely. And please guide me, please protect me, please show me if I'm carrying anything or what I need to do. Because I really don't like it to be in my home, anywhere near me, near my pets, in my personal life. I would want to feel clear.
Yeah, I would imagine you want to, like, sanitization, that type of situation.
I know a lot of healers though that are wacky, and they don't even realize that their field is completely, they're walking around like pig pen. Like a little like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm hearing in everything that you're saying is that you don't need to even think you're sick or need healing in order to pursue healing. If it's about knowing yourself and becoming familiar with yourself, you could think, that everything's okay in your life, that you don't have any problems with your mom or your kids or your parents or your exes or your job, and you might not have any chief physical complaints, but you could still say, hey, I want to know myself. I want to touch this healing more. Is that true? Am I hearing you correctly?
I mean, I have people come and they don't even know, like they have anything imbalanced in them, and that they'll that's happened a lot, where and then they come, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that there was this going on in me. But something got them there, something, intuition. And, sometimes they'll be like, I don't know why I'm here, they just know to go, So, but, and that's where I guess I come in, and that's what I do. I help people then to release what they can't see, they can't see, but my team can,
When you identify what you would call negative energy, how do you communicate that? How does the person you're working with understand it as negative energy, and what can they do about it, after they've had the session with you or after they've done some work with you? What do they continue to do to keep working on things?
So a lot of times some people have this feeling come out of them. They're like, oh my God, like sometimes they'll be making like a strange sound, and they're like, I've never made a sound like that before. Sometimes they just, even if they don't know, they know, like, wow, what was that? I get a lot of that. And how can they keep from opening up? And that's my job, to help show them how they've let that porthole open up in them in the first place. That's the teaching. The healing sometimes isn't the hard part. It's then showing them the teaching, the lesson, where they've aligned or allowed or agreed or somehow, what's the word I'm looking for? Made a contract with to let it in.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, oh, this is where your ego might have gotten in here, and then you sold out and let this, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, or maybe you went unconscious here, people that might be drinking or doing drugs. I speak a lot about the like this whole phase of like ayahuasca and toad and all these other things that people take that they go out of their bodies, and sometimes they think they're seeing one thing and they're being tricked, and they're really being confiscated by something that they don't want inside their body.
When you have ascertained that maybe somebody's made a contract that they're not aware of, will you?
Yes.
Is one of the hats you wear is like a energetic lawyer? You help nullify the contract, break the contract, or resolve the contract?
100%. That is something that I do. And people, it's amazing the power of word, and people don't really realize, and how, where they can break a contract by, making a choice and changing the words and saying, well, I was dumb back here and I didn't realize what I was doing, but no longer do I agree with this. And yes, that is definitely something I am here to help people with. Help them get back in, like, that's not what I signed up for, but maybe they were tricked,
Right. Well, you mentioned words being really powerful, so powerful that maybe people aren't aware of how much power they're wielding.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that power and how you bring awareness to a person's wielding of words?
Yeah. See, people need to start to today have the awareness of what they're doing to other people. Like how they're talking negative about people, and they're actually putting, like bad juju on people. You got to stop. And they got to stop doing it to themselves. They got to stop gossiping. They got to stop, be impeccable and have integrity with their word, and be more conscious, and it's easy to gossip or say something. Just, stop, just stop, and just stop yourself and redirect the conversation, or, and how your own self-talk, the words are powerful. Words are powerful.
I'm always reminded, I don't know where I read this or heard this, but they said that's why they call it spelling.
Yeah.
Because
they put a spell.
Arrange letters together into a word, you are creating a arrangement of words that is spelling.
Yeah, I remember talking with my teacher a lot. And I would say something like, when I call him, like, oh, I just wanted confirmation from you. He goes, not confirmation, affirmation. Because to con. And I was like, oh, okay. So you want to affirm, So yeah, breaking down, this is a whole other topic, but breaking down words, you start to realize what the word is actually saying and meaning.
Can we talk about your teacher? Is that something that
teacher,
maybe we can talk about? Because I think a lot of people would be really interested and amazed to know that your teacher, a person like your teacher,
even existed.
Yeah.
And I even had access to working with. Yeah, I sometimes when I always think about name 10 things that you're grateful for, he's always on that list. For a long time, this is funny, for a long time he was trying to hint to me, like, you need to know who your teacher is. And I'd be like, looking, and he'd be like, and he said, me. He finally said to me, me. And I was like, oh. Because I didn't feel worthy. Like, I didn't feel worthy to be a student of his. But then again, it made sense because no one I've ever met before filled in all the blanks. He was perfect for my teacher. And because, I've worked with plenty of like shamans, and I've worked with plenty. And very powerful people, but no one I could identify with the way I did with him. And he was so humble. I mean, that's the mind-blowing thing. He was so humble, and he left the planet with very little to, filming and stuff. Maybe it was the time, it was 20 years ago. But this man was pretty powerful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is it you have to say to somebody who is trying to decide whether they want to start down this path of healing, and they're undecided? We've talked about people who come and work with you. They've already decided. We have talked about people who have not, they don't even think they have a problem or that they need to be healed, and they're just, either, living their life in the third dimension or something to that effect. But what about that person who's got an idea?
Fence?
Yeah.
On the fence?
Yeah.
I feel everyone's on the fence, and whether they like, oh, I'm serious, and I generally raise an eyebrow at that point, like, because when their stuff starts to really come up, nothing makes you ready for that. You just got to remember why you came there in the first place, and like I say, it has nothing to do again with the personality, because there's nothing that I fill with the ego with this work, and people that know that work with me. But they do the work and they get that, I don't want to say results, but they get the, what word am I looking for? They get the benefits? No, they get the
resolution.
They're, they do the work. And they have that knowing, that true knowing, and that true freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is about being sovereign and being free, from all those places that have us, that don't belong to us. And there's no thing that is more incredible than that. I remember the moment when I really knew why I was here and what to do. I called up my teacher and I told him, and I was so elated. And I said, I know what my purpose is now. And he said, and I said, and he says, you've been doing it all along. But then I had a connection to it now. And so, what was the question again?
I think you answered it.
Okay.
What are some of the most common situations or scenarios that people bring to you when they show up for the first session?
Generally, they are off their path. They're off their path, and they want to feel strong again. They want to be in their power again. They don't want to be like, when they're off their path, this is when things get tricky and dangerous. This is when people, they're off their path, they're questioning who they are, they don't know who they are, and this is when they start going searching, asking for questions, maybe the psychics and all that. They maybe start to, it's when they're vulnerable. And it's not every time, but it's a lot when people come to me.
Do they know they're off their path?
They do.
That's kind of a blessing to know you're off your path, and then to know that there's somebody like you.
That's how it's just the beauty of what I do. It just always I'm like, wow, it just kind of works. They just know that this is the person they go to for that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the majority of my work. They might come because of this and that, or they feel their house is haunted, or they need clearing, or, because they know. But in general, the message is always something even bigger.
What you're saying is that they're off their path. That may express itself in a whole number of ways, which we would be here forever talking about.
Yeah.
And then in your process of getting them onto their path, back into their knowing, toward that space choices, of freedom.
Yeah, making choices that are helping them move into what their flow is meant to be, rather than what their ego thinks they should be doing, or what everybody else is doing. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff, or what their mom wants them to do. So now they're flowing into their own groove, their own vibe.
And that must be so gratifying to see somebody.
Yes, when they listen. When they finally oh yes, this is, and get them out of it's why people struggle and fight with it.
Well, because what you're saying is not that they're listening to you, they're listening to themselves, their deepest self, which is mind-blowing when you think about that. What would happen if more people in this world got to listen to their deepest self and then to live according to their deepest self?
That would be a better world to live in. I mean, then they wouldn't be busy pointing the finger over here and yelling at that person. If everybody was doing what they're meant to do, they wouldn't be pushing their own personal agenda or their pain or projections on other people. They'd just be in their own side of the street.
Yeah.
And they'd be happier, and everybody'd be happier.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.